welcome to the Pro Football Focus DFS Chalk Talk podcast. I'm Scott Barrett, and as always, joining me in the co-pilot seat is DFS ombudsman Tyler Buecher.
Ombudsman? First of all, you're throwing too many big words at me, and because I don't understand them, I'm going to take them as disrespect. So I'm going to tell you once, watch your mouth.
I'm not really sure what that word means either, but hopefully it means gangster. Tyler, last week was weird. It was beyond weird. It was like a David Lynch fever dream. As nonsensical and poorly scripted as anything M. Night Shyamalan produced from 2004 to 2016, reality has officially jumped the shark. The Rams-49ers game went nearly 40 points over their over-under. Mercedes Lewis had 0 catches on 4 targets heading into the week, but left Sunday morning with 3 touchdowns. Jared Goff, Case Keenum, and Brian Hoyer were 3 of our 5 highest-rated quarterbacks of the week. I feel like reality now makes as much sense as a Salvador Dali painting. Cam Newton has an equivalent passer rating to Brock Osweiler over both of their last 16 games. Oh, what time is it? I don't know, because my clock is melting, and my roommate's dog in the backyard is now a giraffe, and it's on fire. The only constant in this crazy, messed up world is Kareem Hunt. My sweet and wonderful Kareem and his beautiful 25 to 45 point games. Outside of that, it's stupid, and I hate it.
It was unbelievable this week. Like you mentioned, the 49ers and Rams going off Thursday night. We should have known from then that week 3 was going to be a trip. Jacksonville scoring 40-plus points. I knew by the time Monday night rolled around that the only play for me to do on the Monday to Thursday upcoming week 4 slate was to play the most obscure plays. So I loaded up 100% Jerron Brown, knowing that anything that could go weird in week 3 was. And Jerron Brown had an opportunity for 2 touchdowns in that game. It's basically the Stranger Things upside down world.
You should have went full weird and put in some Bryce Butler as well.
I'm going a ton of Bears now this week just because I don't know what to expect from the NFL.
How did you do in week 3? My week 3 was mostly poor. I was held afloat by Rodgers with A.J. Green and Jordy Nelson stacks, but also sunk by a ton of exposure to Jay Ajayi and Calvin Benjamin. A lot of Tariq Cohen too, which was fairly tilting given his 76-yard touchdown run cut in half. But I'm over it now. I've moved on. I really haven't, but I need to. So I'm saying I am for the sake of this therapeutic exercise. But how did you do, Tyler?
No, I had kind of thought that this was a terrible week going into it. All along I've been saying that I wanted to play low volume, and that's exactly what I did. I didn't play much cash. I didn't play much in tournaments. But then I saw myself watching that Jacksonville game Sunday morning, losing that money that I had thought I was going to win between that Sunday morning slate. And I just kept mass entering on Sunday morning just on tilt. And I ended up losing a ton of money. So week 4, I'm planning on playing even less volume again because I think the pricing is just as tight going into week 4.
So you're not feeling too good about week 4 then?
No, I think it's a lot of tight pricing. There aren't many values. There aren't a ton of big high-scoring games. The ones that there are, high-scoring ones, are on slates that DraftKings isn't offering anymore. They're the Sunday night games, the Monday night. I don't know. I'm not terribly into week 4 just from the onset.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you, but if you had to pick a quarterback this week, who would you go with?
I think this is a week where we're going to be saying this pretty often throughout the season. You need to pay up for Tom Brady. The dude just scores a ton of fantasy points, throws a ton of touchdowns, and now he gets a home game against Carolina. Drew Brees just threw 3 passing touchdowns against the Panthers last week in Carolina. I think Brady could hit 5 in Foxborough.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is a dumb idea or a brilliant idea, but it's legitimately getting to the point where I'm considering doing this. Let's say I have 150 lineups in a tournament. I go 75 with Brady in various stacks, and then 75 with Gillislee while fading the New England pass catchers. What are your thoughts on that?
I've been saying all offseason, I think that this is the year Tom Brady goes scorched earth campaign, breaks the NFL record for passing touchdowns, and it's already shaping up like that going into week 4. I think going heavy with Brady makes sense. Maybe not 50% Brady, 50% Gillislee, but I like where your head's at, where you expose yourself to this high potent Patriots offense.
All right. Well, outside of Tom Brady, what are some names you're looking at?
There's a couple. I think like pricing this week on especially DraftKings is very tight, where you can make a case for almost any quarterback plus or minus $100 or $200. A guy that I'm super into this week is Carson Palmer at 6,100. After Monday night's performance, I'm going to have a tough time fading both him and Larry Fitzgerald in cash. The 49ers ranked top 10 in both fantasy points allowed and touchdowns allowed to opposing QBs through the first 3 weeks. And here's some fun info on the players that Palmer will be picking apart this weekend. Left cornerback Dante Johnson, PFF's number 78 graded cornerback out of 110. He has a 137.5 NFL rating allowed against. That's the third highest in the league. Slot cornerback Quan Williams, PFF's number 93 graded cornerback, second most targeted slot cornerback in the league. Right cornerback Rashard Robinson, PFF's number 107 graded out of 110. He's allowed 9 of 13 targets to be caught so far this year. I think Palmer can pick apart any one of these corners, and he's coming off a 19.9 DK point outing in week 2 and a 24.7 point outing in week 3. We didn't see any change in salary much after the late changes from their Monday Night Football performance, and I think stacking Palmer and Fitzgerald could be a very profitable one in week 4.
It seems like just yesterday Carson Palmer was dead, and now look where we are.
Yeah, exactly. Things change fast in the NFL.
I think you'll still see low ownership on him as well, so I don't hate that idea. I'm kind of looking to pay up, I think. So help me break this tie. Drew Brees gets Willie Snead back and is against Miami's atrocious secondary. He's averaging 289 yards and 2 touchdowns with 0 interceptions per game despite facing Carolina and the Vikings so far this season. So I like him. Or we could take a look at Matt Ryan versus a Buffalo defense that's been very stout against the run, leading the league in yards before contact per attempt, ideally shutting down Devonta Freeman, allowing Matt Ryan to really run loose, something we haven't seen so far this year. Who do you prefer out of those two options?
I like them both. I think it depends what kind of slate you're playing. The Sunday AM game is in London for Drew Brees, so we're not going to see that on the main slate, but I'm going to be getting some exposure to that just so I can pair him with Michael Thomas. I think Thomas could smash this week. Matt Ryan, I don't buy this EJ Gaines sudden career resurgence. I think Matt Ryan and Julio could eat, and we could finally see Julio get his first touchdown of the season this week against the Bills.
I'm with you. All offseason he talked about Julio Jones getting all this red zone work, and we haven't seen it. Devonta Freeman just keeps vulturing touchdowns, I guess, but I do kind of buy into it a little bit. I think at a certain point we will see that, kind of come back, especially in a week like this against Buffalo, who's been so good against the run to start the season. Were there any more passers you wanted to bring up, or do you want to move to running backs?
There's a couple guys I'm still interested in. They're all guys that have been left for dead. Andy Dalton, Eli Manning, Brian Hoyer. I'll touch on Dalton here. I'm not sure if it's Bill Lazor that resuscitated life into this inept Bengals offense or the fact that it was against the Packers, but what I do know is Andy Dalton is certainly in play again for week 4 against the Browns. Opposing QBs have averaged over 20 DraftKings points per game and have allowed multiple touchdowns in each contest against them. I think this game is going to be closer than people think, and I'm not expecting the Bengals to just run all over the Browns. It's not going to be a massive blowout. Vegas is projecting it to be just a 3.5 point game in Cincinnati's favor. And I don't know, call it a DFS hunch or whatever, but I think the passing game may be the way that the Bengals win this week against the Browns.
Right, I definitely don't hate that. And a big thing I've been nitpicking on Dalton this entire season is just what we've seen statistically over the course of his entire career is that he's much weaker when pressured. His passer rating drops considerably. He's one of the top 3 most pressure-sensitive quarterbacks in the league over the past 5 years or so. And that shouldn't be a problem against the Browns, who, despite leading the league in blitz percentage, rank second worst in pressure percentage. So they're not really doing a good job of getting to the quarterback. Maybe that changes when Myles Garrett comes back. But Andy Dalton should be okay in this matchup. And like you said, definitely room for a big productive week against this poor Cleveland defense.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. He's both pressure sensitive and sun sensitive. Let's move on to the running back position. There's a lot of high-priced guys, I think, in good matchups. Do any catch your eye as the best play?
The best play, I'm not sure, but I'm really excited about Bilal Powell this week. It looks like Matt Forte is going to miss time. He's dealing with a toe injury. Over the final 4 weeks of last season, when Forte played on just 19 snaps, Powell saw monster usage, averaging 20.5 carries per game, 5.75 targets per game. Over that stretch, he outscored all players in fantasy outside of Le'Veon Bell and Aaron Rodgers. He's at home against the Jaguars. Maybe it's not a dream matchup, but I could see him getting significant work as A.J. Boye and Jalen Ramsey shut down New York's outside wide receivers.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I think he's in a great spot here against that team. I'll be honest, if I'm looking to pay up, though, I think I'm going to avoid shady and cash games and save him for tournaments. He's priced at $8,400. The top price guy is Le'Veon at $8,700, and then saving a few dollars down from shady is Zeke at $8,200. Shady will have very low cash game ownership because of that. I think if you're going to pay up for a running back, you're probably going to pay for Le'Veon, and if you're not, you're probably going to pivot towards Zeke, who's in a much more of a plus matchup playing against the Rams. Do you have any interest in one of those three high-end guys?
I think LaShawn McCoy is a super sneaky play who you should get at low ownership. He's currently leading Buffalo in targets, and he gets the dream matchup for receiving running backs in Atlanta.
Oh yeah, for sure. He's caught 5, 6, and 7 receptions to start the year. I'm just going to throw some prop bet money on her that he gets just 8 this week, and that's 100 total yards and a score. I think he's a great tournament option. But if I'm looking for cash, I'm looking for that safety, and I'm probably going to be making Zeke an anchor of my cash lineups. He's averaged 22.3 touches per game, has 12 receptions through 3 weeks after netting just 32 all last year. The Rams have allowed the most rushing touchdowns so far this season with 5, and the 4th most red zone trips per game at 4.0. They just allowed 229 and 113 rushing yards over their past 2 outings. Zeke's in line for massive volume against a team that has become almost like a mini funnel defense. The Rams rank 6th in DVOA against the pass and 19th against the run. I like Zeke a lot here in cash.
Another cheap running back I like is Christian McCaffrey. Kelvin Benjamin did not practice on Wednesday. Greg Olsen, as we know, is out for the rest of the year. McCaffrey last week led the team in targets with 11, catching 9 for 101 yards, as well as 16 rushing yards on the ground. The Patriots are allowing the 3rd most receiving fantasy points per game to opposing running backs this season, after allowing the 4th most last year. Just makes too much sense. Cam is obviously limited as a passer now in 2017, so I expect him to lean heavy on McCaffrey this week.
Yeah, it's just been a struggle with Cam. Like, Greg Olsen, I think, was one of their fastest receivers, which is crazy to say. He was the field stretcher down the middle. He would run down the seam. Kelvin and Devin Funchess, I think, are both slower than him. And now we're seeing without that presence in the offense that the whole team is just struggling. I don't know if it's just his injury or if it's the whole team as a whole, but this Panthers offense is hard to rely on outside of McCaffrey, who's just become a great check down option, especially on like PPR sites. I think a guy similar cash range or price range that I'm looking at is Dalvin Cook at 6,500. I think he's become cash game viable after what he put up last week with Keenum under center. Cook should be priced right next to Kareem Hunt, in my opinion. He's got 23.7 touches per game so far to start his career. The Lions defense ranks top 7 in both receptions and fantasy points allowed to opposing running backs. Cook has caught 10 passes in his first 3 games. I think he makes a lot of sense here at 6,500. And I think if you're trying to pair some of the high-priced wide receivers, Cook provides a quality ceiling to include with them at not a exorbitant price.
Right. Cook has been a revelation. He ranks third best in PFF run grade, 4.7 yards per carry. He ranks behind only Todd Gurley in total touches. I loved him coming out. I love the fit with Pat Shurmur even more. One concern I have is that he saw just 56% of the snaps in their Week 2 loss to Pittsburgh, but 76% of the snaps in their 2 victories. Cooks is our second worst graded blocker, and he's dropped 2 passes so far as a receiver, so I think the Vikings might think Jerick McKinnon's a better fit for the team when the team is likely to go pass heavy or is trailing. So a lot is going to depend for me on whether or not Sam Bradford's playing this week, and whether or not I think the team has a legitimate chance to walk away with the win.
Yeah, that's huge, because if Bradford's back in the fold, I think I'm just going to hammer my ownership for Stefon Diggs and Adam Thielen, who are both in plus matchups in my opinion.
Ooh, I think Thielen's in the plus matchup.
Oh yeah, well, Quandary Diggs means load up. Right. And I'm not afraid to target Darius Slay. We'll get to that later though.
Sure.
I'm trying to think of any other running backs that I'm interested in. I want to ask you about Wendell Smallwood. He was a high waiver wire pickup in season-long leagues, and he's priced down below just at 4,100 on DraftKings. Is he a viable punt play this week?
I guess so, but I mean, we have a pretty decent sample of him just failing to do anything anytime he's been given the opportunity. So just based on the last 2 seasons, I'm not optimistic.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you there. I feel like his ceiling is maybe hitting 3x value. He played on just 60.6% of the snaps after Darren Sproles left. He's now out for the season. One thing that Smallwood does have in his favor is he's averaged 3.05 yards after contact per attempt so far this year. That's a rate that would have finished top 10 in 2016. It'll be interesting to see if that continues with more volume going his way. Moving on to the wide receiver position, I think you can make a case for almost any wide receiver this week at any price range. I love the variety and the pricing that they have here, but it makes it really tough, I think, to try and find an edge. What are you doing with the wide receiver position, and how are you attacking it this week?
Yeah, I'm just really spreading out my ownership because, like you said, there's just so many different wide receivers to like. One guy I'm on is DeSean Jackson up against my Giants Eli Apple, a guy I've kind of trashed relentlessly on Twitter, arguing he should be benched in favor of Ross Cockrell. But we know what the Giants do. They shut down opposing wide receiver ones with Janoris Jenkins shadowing when he's healthy. Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie shuts down opposing slot wide receivers. And then the Giants, seemingly for no reason, allow outside wide receiver twos to feast on Eli Apple all day. In his last 4 games, he's seen 32 targets, 21 receptions, 293 yards, and 5 touchdowns. If that were a wide receiver, he'd rank behind only Stefon Diggs in fantasy points per game. This production's also not even including the multiple times he's been beaten deep and called for DPIs. He's our 11th worst graded cornerback this season. DeSean Jackson should have a field day, as Mike Evans is in a troublesome matchup with Jenkins.
I couldn't agree more, and I think a way I'm going to play it is doing some Giant stacks and bringing them back with DeSean Jackson. I think Odell Beckham and Sterling Shepard are both in play here. If we'll stick with Sterling Shepard here if we're in that mid-price range. He's run 88% of his routes from the slot to start the year. That means he'll spend most of his time against Tampa Bay's slot cornerback Robert McClain. McClain is getting torched by opposing wide receivers in the slot so far, allowing an 82% catch rate. That's the second worst in the league, and 0.35 fantasy points per route defended. That's 15th worst. I'll be stacking him with Eli and with ODB, who I think has returned to his old self after that outing he played against the Eagles. Touchdown fine and all. Beckham looked like he was back. Ended up scoring 9 catches, 79 yards, and 2 touchdowns on 13 targets. The Giants continue to lead the league in pass play percentage, passing 72.67% of the time. As our own Pat Thorman noted in his Snaps, Pace, and Stats weekly segment, the Giants are trying to return to their no-huddle tempo from last season. In 2016, they led the league in it, and it was clear that they were trying to get back to that against the Eagles last week. We could see a lot of Manning to Beckham in this plus matchup. To be fair, the Buccaneers are just decimated by injuries. Last week, Brent Grimes, Quan Alexander, and Chris Baker were all inactives. Noah Spence, Gerald McCoy, and Levante David all left week 3 with injuries. If Eli takes on a defense that's filled with a ton of multiple backups, I'm going to have just a lot of Giants game stacks.
Right. Vernon Hargreaves, I do not think is very good. He was the only cornerback to give up over 1,000 yards last season, and he's given up 163 in 2 games thus far. I think Odell Beckham Jr. is going to pick apart this defense, as there's really no one to cover him. There were concerns heading into last week whether or not he was 100%, but he really looked awesome to me. Maybe he's just at 95%, but that should be enough in my estimation, given this soft matchup. A guy I'm on that I don't think anyone else is really on is Jarvis Landry, who ranks first among all wide receivers, tied with Dez Bryant in expected fantasy points per game. Yes, he's over 3 points ahead of Parker, though Parker has more fantasy points. Landry has served in the more valuable role. Marshawn Lattimore shut down Brandon Cooks 2 weeks ago in shadow coverage. He was amazing in college, easily our top corner coming out. He missed last week with a concussion, but if he returns, I like his chances of shadowing and shutting down Devontae Parker this week, opening up Jarvis Landry underneath. New Orleans has allowed the second most yards to wide receivers out of the slot, and I really love the idea of pairing him with Brees and Michael Thomas, who gets an attractive matchup as well. The Dolphins are our worst graded team in pass coverage this year. Their outside cornerbacks, Byron Maxwell and Xavier Howard, grade among our 25 worst. Their slot cornerback has been much better, but you wouldn't see too much of Thomas. Howard was bad last year as well, where Maxwell was decent, but Maxwell was one of our worst graded cornerbacks in 2015, and he almost lost his job this summer. So I think right now that's probably my ideal stack that I plan on having a lot of exposure to.
Yeah, that's a great game to stack. I think we're going to see that one get a pretty high game total, and that's what Vegas believes as well. Moving down the price list, guy that I'm interested in the mid-price range is DeAndre Hopkins. Here's how he's fared against the Titans over the past 3 years. This is all during the Bill O'Brien era, for some reference. He's scored 14.5 DraftKings points, 47.8, 23.4, 27.7, 1.4, and 22.3. If you chalk up that one catch, 4-yard game as an outlier like I do, then we're just left with a slew of productive fantasy outings for Nuke. He's priced at $6,400 after averaging 12.3 targets per game to open the season. That's just ludicrous. And he's got a nice matchup on the outside against cornerbacks Adoree Jackson and Bryce McCain. Jackson was the Titans' first-round pick, but he's been picked on quite a bit to start the year by opposing quarterbacks. He's been targeted 21 times, allowing 13 catches for 143 yards and 2 touchdowns. McCain has allowed 6 touchdowns to opposing wideouts last year. Only 5 cornerbacks allowed more. The 2 of them rank number 65 and number 6 back-to-back out of 110 qualifying. I think they're certainly beatable for DeAndre Hopkins this week, especially considering the volume that he's seeing.
Right, and Adoree Jackson was also our 5th worst graded cornerback this preseason, and he was a guy I was really down on coming out, just in comparison to the guys within 2 or 3 rounds of where he was drafted. His college production was nowhere close to those guys. He is super athletic and a good returner, but he's just very raw and he's easily beatable. I honestly don't. I like this idea a lot. I think Watson's in play as a stacking option after throwing for 301 yards and 2 touchdowns with 41 rushing yards on the ground against the Patriots last week. The Titans led the league in pressures per dropback last season, but they ranked just 23rd best this year. Watson's leading the league in rushing yards among quarterbacks with 124. That should keep his floor relatively high. And I know Will Fuller's back, but you got to think if Watson does anything, chances are it's going through Hopkins.
Yeah, Fuller's presence just stretches the field and allows Hopkins to do more underneath, and it gives running lanes for Watson if he needs to take them. The Titans have allowed the third most fantasy points to opposing QBs. I really like it as a punt play.
All right, why don't you tell us about Larry Fitzgerald's soft matchup this week? I know you kind of already alluded to it.
Yeah, I kind of already touched on it, but it's just the perfect matchup against their atrocious corners. Fitz missed the price jump after playing on Monday Night Football. He gets to play against these terrible corners. I think he has a chance to absolutely go off against Quan Williams, who's been the second most targeted slot cornerback in the league. I don't really need to go on much further. I think Fitz is the must-play value play of the week here on DraftKings.
Right, I definitely don't hate that, and I do like Thielen quite a bit. So he's going to draw Quandre Diggs and a little bit of Nevin Lawson. Diggs was easily one of our worst cornerbacks in the league last year. He's played a lot better this season, but I still am not yet buying into it completely. Nevin Lawson is one of our 12 worst graded cornerbacks this season. He's allowing a 101.1 passer rating. And Stefon Diggs looks legitimately like a Antonio Brown clone, but he's up against Darius Slay, who's going to shadow. And Slay is the league's third best shadow cornerback per a chart I came up with, which pretty much just looks at every shadow cornerback over the past 2 seasons, their shadow games, who they shadowed, the expected fantasy points per game of those players they shadowed, and then their actual production allowed. And Diggs ranked third best behind only Casey Hayward and Patrick Peterson. I think this is legitimately a tough enough matchup for me to fade Diggs entirely, but I'm excited about Thielen, who surprisingly ranks 11th best in expected fantasy points per game. So he's seeing a sizable role. He's our 5th highest graded wide receiver this season. He's performing well. He just doesn't have any touchdowns. And his price is still very low. So he's a guy I expect to have plenty of exposure to.
Well, I'm going to slightly disagree here with you, Scott, because I'm kind of super into both Diggs and Thielen. There were 14 wide receivers so far this season that have over 2.0 yards per route run. Thielen and Diggs are both those guys. I'm not really that worried about Slay in shadow coverage. He allowed a 92.6 QB rating last year to opposing wide receivers. I don't know. I think Diggs is seeing enough volume where he could overcome that shadow coverage, especially if Bradford plays. I think it's going to be a game-time decision how much volume I'll want on Diggs, but if Bradford's playing, I'm going to up that a lot.
AJ Green is another guy who's in a smash spot. The Browns have given up a combined 22 receptions, 366 yards, and 2 touchdowns to Antonio Brown, T.Y. Hilton, and Jeremy Maclin. Bill Lazor, their new offensive coordinator, has him heavily involved. I know you're planning on running out a bunch of Andy Dalton lineups, so he definitely makes a great stacking option. I'm not sure how much Dalton I'll have, but I'll definitely have decent amount of exposure to AJ Green.
Oh, for sure. He's going against Jamar Taylor, who's tied with Eric Rowe as our worst-ranked cornerback so far this year. I play in a lot of IDP leagues, and a lot of the guys I have on my team are Jamar Taylor and Jalen Mills, 2 guys that just allow a ton of receptions when work because I'm just looking for tackles. These are guys that allow the receptions and then make the tackle afterward. I think Green has a chance to go off here. We saw last week that Bill Lazor got this offense turned around, and I'm super into the Bengals again. If I'm looking to save some money, though, a guy I'm kind of interested in here is Jordan Matthews. I think he's being left for dead, being priced under the 4K mark. He's currently at 3.9K. He's my punt option of the week if I'm trying to coerce some studs into a lineup. His season high in the targets is 5, so I understand if you disagree with me here, but I think he's in a prime one-on-one matchup with slot cornerback Brian Poole. The Bills are currently 8-point road dogs. They're going to need to pass. Poole leads all slot cornerbacks in most targets, receptions, and receiving yards allowed in the slot. That's not a good thing to lead the league in. Opposing slot receivers Randall Cobb and Golden Tate combined for 20 targets in the slot over the past 2 weeks, 9 for Cobb, 11 for Tate. And we saw Tate almost score 2 touchdowns. It should have been a second one, in my opinion. I think J-Matt has a great chance to easily exceed value if he's given that kind of volume of around 9 to 11 targets.
I'm more on Charles Clay in that game, but a few guys not really being talked about are Tyrell Williams and Travis Benjamin, who should get set to face off against Jalen Mills for a decent amount of their routes, maybe around 40 to 50%. Jalen Mills was our worst graded cornerback last season, and he broke a PFF record last week. Unfortunately, it wasn't a very good one. He saw 21 targets into his coverage, which is the most ever in the PFF era, which dates back to 2007. He also gave up 2 touchdowns to Odell Beckham Jr. He's seen 41 targets so far. The next closest cornerback has 8 fewer on 33 more snaps. Both wide receivers really haven't done much, but maybe as like 3 to 5% guys, they're worth a deeper look. Seems like you wanted to move on to tight ends, Tyler. You want to talk about who your top tight end of the week is?
Sure, it's the highest priced guy, Rob Gronkowski. After a strange week 1 for the Patriots against the Chiefs, things have kind of normalized in New England. Tom Brady's back to throwing a ton of touchdowns to everyone, and that includes big tight end Gronkowski. Over the last 2 weeks, he has stat lines of 9 targets, 6 receptions, 116 yards, and a touchdown against the Saints. And he's got a 10 target, 8 reception, 89 yard, 1 touchdown line against Houston in week 3. Gronk's 2.48 yards per route run is right in line with AJ Green's 2.47 for some context sake. Now he faces a Carolina squad that looks tough on paper. They have allowed the 4th fewest fantasy points to the position, and they've given up just 10 receptions for 74 yards total through the first 3 weeks. I think Gronk can beat those numbers collectively on his own by himself. Kuechly is good, but he's not Gronk eliminating good. Gronk was at just 3.0% ownership last week in the Millie Maker and scored 22.9 points. DK gave him a $200 salary decrease. I'm so in if we can get that kind of low ownership again on Gronk.
Right. Gronk is just always in play for me. He ranks 2nd best all time in touchdowns per game. You know, if Brady's throwing for multiple touchdowns, chances are Gronk will have at least one, and he's probably the top stacking option for me this week if I do run out those 50-50 Brady-Gillislee lineups. My top favorite tight end this week, actually, is Travis Kelce. He's coming off of a rough week against the Chargers where he saw just 1 target for 1 yard. But he did have 8 for 103 and a score in a tough matchup against the Eagles a week prior. I'm hoping to get him at low ownership. The Redskins allowed the 5th most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends last season. So far this year, they've allowed 8 receptions and 93 yards to Zach Ertz, 4 for 43 and a touchdown to Jared Cook, and 3 receptions and 95 yards to Gerald Everett.
Yeah, can't go wrong there with Kelce. I found myself, if I'm trying to save some money at the tight end position, I keep finding myself putting Cameron Brate in lineups. The Giants lead the league in receptions allowed to opposing tight ends. They've given up the 2nd most touchdowns to the position and the 2nd most DraftKings points. They've allowed a top 12 tight end every week so far this season. Brate has just 3 and 4 targets over the past 2 weeks. That's not a lot of volume, but he's clearly the receiving option Tampa Bay is going with at the tight end position. Brate has run a route on 64.1% of his snaps compared to O.J. Howard, who's run a route on 37.5%. The Giants do a great job of taking away a team's number 1 outside receiver and slot wide receiver. The way to attack them is via ancillary outside wide receivers and the tight end position. So Brate and Djax are going to be guys that I'm heavily pursuing this week. I think they both are going to be the keys to if the Buccaneers can beat the Giants again this week.
Frustratingly for me, because I kept wanting to fade him in the beginning of the season, is Zach Ertz, who's just in another great spot. Ertz and Alshon Jeffrey own a combined 53% of the target market share in Philadelphia. Jeffrey's going to be probably shut down by shadow cornerback Casey Hayward now that Jason Verrett is out. On that chart I referenced before, which included Darius Slay, Casey Hayward ranked just above him in 2nd place. So targets should be funneled in his direction this week. I'm also on Austin Seferian-Jenkins as a cheap option. He saw 6 targets last week, which was a team high, and he's just a guy I've chased for 2 years now as an ASJ truther, but I'm excited for this week in a matchup that bodes well for him as Jacksonville's cornerbacks funnel targets underneath.
Yeah, I mean, if you need it, I think it's a good punt play. A punt play that I'm looking for on FanDuel is going to be a guy like Ryan Griffin. He's priced as the tight end 22. Our buddy Graham Barfield at Fantasy Guru noted earlier that Griffin has 8 catches for 85 yards and 5 catches for 61 yards and a touchdown in the 2 games that Griffin has played without CJ Fedorowicz. He's a hold your nose as you hit submit type of play for me, but I understand it if you need the salary relief.
I think Charles Clay is a fine play. His price finally jumped up a little bit, but he's still kind of a value. He ranks 13th in targets per game, first in targets inside the 10 and 20 yard lines. He has 80% of Buffalo's end zone targets, 4 of 5. He also leads all tight ends in expected receiving fantasy point market share. So really he's just been Buffalo's entire passing game outside of LaShawn McCoy. Tyrod Taylor struggled to gel with Zay Jones, Jordan Matthews, Andre Holmes. So I think he's a fine play this week. Don't love him, but he is in play.
No, I agree with you. I think that's the way to attack the team. How about defenses? Anything that catches your eye there?
I think one that not a lot of people are talking about is Cincinnati. They rank best in pressures per dropback, but the Browns, despite spending all this money on their new offensive line, are allowing pressure 38% of the time, which ranks 9th worst. So I could see them really getting to the quarterback this week, forcing some turnovers. So that's a defense I haven't heard much about this week that I'm into.
Yeah, I agree with you completely there. I think the way that I'll be attacking defenses this week is paying up for the production. I like a lot of the guys priced above the 3K mark. Jaguars are on the road against the Jets. They're the highest priced defense on the main slate. I don't know if that's a play that you necessarily need, but I do like the Bengals. I like the Patriots at home against the Panthers, the Broncos at home against the Raiders. There's a couple options. I think you could find a nice core of plays to rotate around in GPPs this week.
Right, I'm with you. There's multiple options that all seem pretty decent. Again, if you're looking at low price defenses or kickers, try to lean for defenses, home favorites. For kickers, high implied point total. That's typically what's ideal. Yeah, so Tyler, I think we're back to our awkward podcast exits. Somehow still not as awkward as my rap from last week that I hope most people didn't listen to. But I'm Scott Barrett. You can find me at Scott Barrett DFB on Twitter. Tyler, where can the folks at home find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Tyler Buecher, Buecher.
All right, thanks everyone for tuning in. We will see you all next week. Good luck with your lineups.